best friend, Jamie Laiaddee. They couldn't charge him with her murder.
One of my best friends had been missing for 10 weeks.
Jamie Lai was a 26-year-old woman with a promising career and a tight-knit group of friends. She graduated from the University of Michigan and built a life for herself in Phoenix, Arizona. She was respected in her community, independent, and driven. But Jamie had a secret. She was slowly fading from the lives of those closest to her. For 2 years before her disappearance, Jamie had become increasingly distant. She stopped making plans with her friends, avoided her family, and rarely let people into her personal life. The only person she saw every day was her live-in boyfriend, Brian Stewart. Brian and Jamie had been together for nearly 3 years. But while Jamie was ambitious and financially stable, Brian was different. He worked as a personal trainer and made significantly less than Jamie. Yet, Jamie paid most of the bills and owned the house they lived in. Friends recall that Jamie never spoke about her past, and when asked about her family, she would simply say, "Don't ask me about them." On the night of March 17, 2010, Jamie and Brian had an argument. Jamie wanted to move to Denver for a new job, but Brian refused. That night, tensions were high, but Brian claims that when they went to bed, everything had settled down. The next morning, Brian left for work early, at around 3:15 a.m. He says Jamie was still in bed and he kissed her goodbye before leaving. But Jamie was never seen again. For 10 weeks, no one realized she was missing. Her friends had stopped reaching out, thinking she was just busy. Even her family had limited contact with her. It wasn't until May 28th, nearly 3 months later, that the first alarm was raised. Jamie's friend Marina Buffa received a call from Brian. He told her he was starting to worry about Jamie because he hadn't heard from her. Marina, now concerned, contacted another friend, and together they hired a private investigator. The investigator began looking into Jamie's recent activities, credit card usage, phone records, emails, but what he found was shocking, or rather, what he didn't find. Jamie had left no digital footprint, no bank withdrawals, no emails, no calls. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. And then they checked her house. The private investigator, along with Jamie's friend Marina, decided to check her house. What they found was unsettling. Jamie's car was still parked outside. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken windows. Everything seemed normal at first glance. But the moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The house was eerily quiet, with a layer of dust settling on the furniture. In Jamie's bedroom, the bed was neatly made, but her clothes, purse, and shoes were untouched. It looked as if she had simply vanished without taking anything with her. If Jamie had planned to leave, why hadn't she packed a single thing? Her expensive jewelry was still in her drawer, her passport untouched, her laptop sitting right where she had last left it. But most chilling of all, Jamie's cell phone was on her nightstand, dead. She hadn't used it in over 2 months. With Jamie missing and no signs of her whereabouts, police turned to the last person to see her alive, her boyfriend, Brian Stewart. When questioned, Brian was cooperative. At first, he repeated the same story he had told Marina. Jamie was home when he left for work on March 18th. But when asked why he waited nearly 3 months before reporting her missing, his answer raised suspicions. "I just assumed she left," Brian said. "Jamie always talked about moving. I thought she packed up and went to Denver." But remember, Jamie didn't take any clothes, no credit card activity, no calls, no messages. And yet Brian didn't find this strange. He never tried to reach her. He never contacted her job. He never told her friends. Instead, Brian continued living in their house. He used Jamie's car. He slept in their bed. He even threw a party at the house just weeks after she left. Something wasn't right. And when police dug deeper, what they found was horrifying. With Brian's suspicious behavior, police obtained a warrant to search Jamie's house. What they found would change the case forever. At first glance, the house looked normal, but under closer inspection, forensic teams uncovered something terrifying. Tiny specks of blood were found in the master bedroom. Someone had tried to clean it up, but under forensic analysis, it was clear. This was human blood. Even more disturbing, the bathroom drains were scrubbed aggressively with bleach. The floors, scrubbed. The walls, wiped down. It was as if someone had been desperately trying to erase something. But then, they found the rug. It was undeniable. Something violent had happened in that house. As police dug deeper, neighbors came forward with chilling details. One neighbor, Mrs. Carter, reported hearing loud arguing from Jamie's house the night she disappeared. "I heard screaming. It was around midnight," Mrs. Carter recalled. Then, silence. After that, I never saw Jamie again. Another neighbor noticed something even more disturbing. A few days after Jamie vanished, Brian was seen carrying large trash bags out of the house, bags that appeared heavy. What was he trying to get rid of? And then there was the backyard. Brian had suddenly dug up a section of the yard and poured fresh cement over it. When asked about it, he shrugged and said he was renovating. But why? Why now? With the evidence mounting, police had no choice but to act. They brought Brian in for further questioning, and this time, his story started to fall apart. With mounting evidence against him, Brian was brought in for questioning once again. This time, investigators weren't holding back. At first, Brian stuck to his story. Jamie had left on her own, and he had no idea where she was. But detectives weren't buying it. One detective leaned in, placing crime scene photos in front of him. The blood in the bedroom, the missing rug, the bleach-scrubbed drains. "Explain this, Brian," the detective demanded. For the first time, Brian hesitated. His usual confidence wavered. He stammered, changed his story, and then he made a critical mistake. He admitted that he and Jamie had fought that night, that she fell and hit her head during an argument. But was it really an accident? Detectives pressed harder, but Brian refused to say more. Without a body, they couldn't charge him with murder, but they weren't giving up. Investigators returned to Brian's house, this time with cadaver dogs. The dogs immediately reacted to a specific area, the freshly poured concrete in the backyard. What was underneath? As the concrete was removed, a horrible stench filled the air. And then, they saw it. A large black garbage bag, partially buried in the dirt. Inside the bag was Jamie. Her body had been wrapped in plastic, hidden beneath the ground, as if Brian had hoped she'd never be found. But now, there was no escaping the truth. On December 15th, Brian was officially arrested and charged with Jamie's murder. For months, he had lied. He had smiled in front of cameras, played the role of a heartbroken boyfriend, but in reality, he had been hiding the darkest of secrets. Now justice was finally catching up to him. But the trial was just beginning, and what was revealed in court would shock everyone. The trial of Brian Thompson began 6 months after Jamie's body was found. Prosecutors wasted no time painting a grim picture of what really happened that night. They presented forensic evidence, the blood in the bedroom, the missing carpet, the chemicals used to clean the crime scene, but the most damning piece of evidence? Jamie's autopsy report. The medical examiner confirmed that Jamie had been brutally attacked. She had not simply fallen during an argument, as Brian had claimed. She had been beaten, strangled, and then buried like trash in her own backyard. The evidence was overwhelming, but Brian's defense team had their own strategy. Brian's lawyers argued that Jamie's death was a tragic accident. They claimed Brian had acted in a panic after Jamie hit her head, that he buried her out of fear, with not malice. They painted him as a grieving boyfriend who made a terrible mistake, but the prosecution wasn't letting him off that easy. A mistake? The prosecutor's voice rang through the courtroom. A mistake doesn't involve cleaning up a crime scene. A mistake doesn't involve lying for months. A mistake doesn't involve burying a body under concrete. The jury listened carefully. The tension in the room was suffocating, but the most dramatic moment was still to come. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a decision. Everyone held their breath as the forepersons stood up. We, the jury, find the defendant, Brian Thompson, guilty of murder in the first degree. A wave of relief spread through the courtroom. Jamie's family wept, holding each other. Justice had been served. But the story wasn't over yet, because what happened next was something no one saw coming. Brian Thompson sat motionless as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. His attorneys had fought hard to reduce the charges, but the evidence was undeniable. The prosecution demanded the maximum penalty. Mr. Thompson, this court finds your actions to be premeditated, calculated, and cruel. You deprived Jamie and her family of justice for far too long. For the charge of first-degree murder, I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The room erupted. Some wept in relief, others in shock. Brian's face was pale, his body frozen as the weight of his fate sank in. Justice had been served, but the darkness of this case wasn't finished yet. For months, Brian refused to speak about what truly happened that night. But then, in a moment of unexpected weakness, he confessed. "Jamie didn't fall," he admitted. "She tried to leave me. I got angry. I hit her too hard. I didn't mean to kill her, but when I saw her on the ground, I knew there was no going back." He described how he wrapped her in a sheet, how he cleaned up the blood, how he spent hours digging the grave under the shed, making sure no one would ever find her. Brian thought he was smart enough to erase his crime, but in the end, justice caught up to him. Jamie Lynn Parker was just 24 years old when her life was stolen. She had dreams, ambitions, and a future ahead of her. Her family, though shattered by grief, found solace in knowing that Brian would never hurt anyone again. "If you are in a toxic relationship, get out before it's too late," Jamie's mother warned. "We didn't see the signs soon enough. Don't let this happen to someone you love." Jamie's story serves as a painful reminder. Love should never hurt, and no matter how carefully someone tries to cover up a crime, the truth always finds a way out.